asked them, how much lithium did you want to put me on exactly? It took them 4 days to answer because they were embarrassed about the amount, right? And I refused to take this, right? You understand that if I had taken the medication, I would not be here, and it would have been, oh, he was deeply troubled. We miss him. We love his music, though.
Well, they would have Britney Spears too. I mean, look at
they would have Michael Jackson.
Or what?
Do you think that there is actual cloning going on?
We know that there's actual cloning going on. The question I believe you're asking is human cloning.
Oh, yes, sir.
But let's start with the real question. The real question is cloning going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
They probably cloned that nigga. It's easy to tell when a motherfucker got cloned. They whole aura change. NBA YoungBoy, bro. When he in his bag, there is nobody that could touch him with NBA YoungBoy in his bag.
The NBA YoungBoy cloning story just got a whole lot deeper. And this time, Kanye West is at the center of it, reportedly stepping forward with details that have left people genuinely unsettled. Fans have been raising questions about YoungBoy possibly being cloned ever since his arrest back in 2021. At first, it sounded like just another internet conspiracy, the kind that gets dismissed before anyone even looks into it. But then new information started surfacing, and suddenly it didn't sound so far-fetched anymore. Kanye West had already been sounding the alarm about music industry figures allegedly being replaced or manipulated by their labels, cloned as some people put it, so they could be pushed harder, worked longer, and used to promote ideas their real selves would never get behind. And just like clockwork, nobody took him seriously. That's become a pattern with Kanye. He says something, the world laughs it off, and then years down the line, footage resurfaces of him talking about the exact same thing everyone is now finally paying attention to. What makes this story hit even harder is that YoungBoy himself recently addressed it directly. In an interview, he was asked how he felt about people claiming he'd been cloned. His response wasn't a denial. He said plainly, "I am cloned." So let's go back to where this whole thing started. The last confirmed sighting of the real NBA YoungBoy was in March of 2021. Federal agents attempted to pull over a vehicle he was traveling in, citing an outstanding federal warrant. Rather than complying, YoungBoy fled, first in the car, then on foot. Law enforcement deployed canine units to track him down, and he was eventually taken into custody. What happened next is where the story starts to get complicated. The very next day, a California magistrate judge granted him a bond, a substantial one. The conditions included $540,000 in cash, collateral backed by 2 properties valued at $1.5 million, drug testing requirements, an ankle monitor, and several other restrictions. By any standard, it was a significant bond, but it was granted. The catch, it still needed to be approved by a judge back in Louisiana. That Louisiana judge had other plans. Not only did he refuse to sign off on the bond, he went a step further and filed a motion to keep YoungBoy detained, arguing that releasing him would pose a threat to the community. The motion was approved, the bond was revoked, and YoungBoy remained behind bars for the next 6 months, finally securing his release in October 2021. 6 months. No public appearances, no verified contact with the outside world. And yet, the music kept coming. New tracks, new releases, dropped consistently as if he were sitting in a studio somewhere with full creative control. Some people brushed it off, saying he must have recorded enough material before his arrest to keep things moving. On the surface, that explanation holds up. Artists do stockpile music, it happens. But here's where things get harder to explain away. When YoungBoy reappeared, something was noticeably off, and it wasn't just one thing. Fans who had followed him closely for years started pointing out physical differences that couldn't easily be explained. Tattoos on his face appeared to have shifted in placement. Some markings that had previously been visible were simply gone. A distinctive scar on his forehead had disappeared. His hairstyle had changed. Even the energy he carried, his entire presence felt different. And his voice, to those who noticed, didn't quite sound the same either. Taken individually, any one of these changes might be explainable. But all of them together? His most dedicated fans weren't willing to let it slide, and they made sure everyone else noticed too. Now, I already know what some of you are thinking. Out of everyone in the music industry, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Rihanna, artists who have been household names for decades. Why would anyone bother targeting YoungBoy specifically? The answer is actually pretty straightforward when you think about it: his audience. Unlike those legacy artists whose fan bases have largely grown into adulthood, YoungBoy's core following is teenagers. And that's not a small thing. That's influence at its most potent. We've heard plenty about how entertainment is used to push certain ideas and narratives to the public. But here's the problem with trying to run that playbook through artists who blew up in the early 2000s. Their fans are older, more set in their ways, and harder to shift. As the old saying goes, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. YoungBoy's fan base is different. They're young, they're impressionable, and they look up to him. That makes him an extraordinarily valuable piece on the board for anyone trying to shape culture from behind the scenes. And here's what makes the timing so suspicious. Before he went to jail, YoungBoy's music carried a very specific message. He was openly calling the industry demonic, talking about faith, encouraging the youth to think for themselves. Then he gets locked up, disappears for 6 months, and comes back, and suddenly the content shifts entirely. The introspection was gone. In its place, music centered around street beef, targeting opponents and reigniting old feuds.
One commentator put it bluntly: YoungBoy was out there talking about God, talking about grind, talking about how the industry was corrupt. And the moment he started doing those interviews and speaking that truth, he ended up behind bars. Then he walks out and it's a completely different energy. Back to the street narratives, back to the confrontation, back to the exact image the industry had always wanted him to maintain. There's also a financial angle here that's impossible to ignore. YoungBoy is currently one of the most streamed artists in the entire United States, sitting right behind Taylor Swift and Drake. And despite those numbers, he has remained an independent artist. Every dollar his music generates goes directly to him, not to a label. His recent arena tour sold out venue after venue, with fans still locked out trying to find tickets. The demand is undeniable. At this point, he could realistically fill a stadium. For record labels, watching all of that money flow completely around them, that has to sting. And if they can't profit off him legitimately, replacing him with someone who follows orders without question starts to look very appealing. That's where Kanye West comes back into the picture. Kanye has publicly stated that the industry identified YoungBoy as a threat, someone too independent, too outspoken, and too unwilling to play by their rules. According to Kanye, that's exactly the type of artist they feel they need to bring under control. What makes Kanye's position on this particularly interesting is that the two of them have real history. Back in 2022, when Kanye was facing intense public backlash over controversial comments he made, YoungBoy was one of the very few people in music who stood behind him, releasing a track called "This Not a Song, This For My Supporters" as a direct show of solidarity. Then just last year, the two linked up again on a collaborative track called "Alive." These aren't strangers making headlines together. These are two artists who have clearly had real conversations behind closed doors. And Kanye himself has admitted to almost being swallowed up by the same industry machine he's now warning others about. He once said, and this quote has resurfaced repeatedly in these conversations, that celebrities are essentially decoys, faces placed in front of brands and agendas run by people the public never sees. He specifically pushed back against the idea that musicians are the ones pulling strings, pointing out that artists are often forced to soften or reshape their own lyrics just to protect their deals. That's not a fringe take. That's someone who has been inside the system, describing how it works from personal experience. Now, to be balanced about it, Kanye has not been without fault in his own story. The anti-Semitic comments he made caused real harm and were widely and rightly condemned. That part of his history doesn't get glossed over. But separating his personal failures from the broader observations he's made about industry control, that's a conversation worth having. But many people who were paying close attention felt that what followed went far beyond simply holding him accountable. Kanye has claimed that once those in power realized they couldn't bring him back into line, they allegedly began making moves to have him institutionalized, where he could be heavily medicated and ultimately replaced with a more compliant version of himself. And he didn't just make that claim empty-handed. Kanye leaked what he said was a text message from someone he described as an industry handler, a message that allegedly laid out in plain terms exactly what would happen to him if he refused to get back on his prescribed medication. The message read, "I'm going to help you in one of a couple of ways. First, you and I sit down and have a loving and open conversation, but you don't use curse words and everything discussed is based on fact, not something a friend told you or you saw in a tweet. Second option, I have you institutionalized again, where they medicate the hell out of you and you go back to zombie land forever. Playdates with the kids just won't be the same." Kanye later spoke about this publicly, describing how he was given a diagnosis he believed was wrong and was being pressured to take a significant amount of lithium. He said when he asked the doctors exactly how much they intended to put him on, it took them 4 days to give him an answer, and he believed their hesitation was because they knew the dosage was excessive. He refused to take it, and he was direct about what he thought the outcome would have been if he had, that he simply would have faded away, written off as deeply troubled, mourned briefly, and forgotten. He pointed to Britney Spears as an example of what that road looks like, someone who entered the system exhausted and overwhelmed, and after years inside it, emerged visibly changed. The conversation around her conservatorship and what it did to her over time has since become one of the most discussed cases of institutional control in entertainment history. Michael Jackson's name came up in the same breath. The public had plenty to say in response. Comments began circulating with people drawing connections between multiple artists who had faced legal trouble or public breakdowns around the same time, suggesting a pattern. Others pushed the conversation further, arguing that human cloning technology has existed quietly longer than most people realize, and what's playing out in Hollywood is simply the most visible example of it. So here's where we land, and this is the part where your perspective actually matters. What do you make of all of this? Do you think the changes people noticed in YoungBoy's NBA after his release were just the natural result of time, trauma, and circumstances? Or does the full picture, the physical changes, the shift in his music, his own words, and Kanye's allegations point to something that deserves a harder look? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And when you're done, click here to watch another story that goes just as deep.